Rosalie was dressed in training clothes. Unlike her usual princess appearance as she arrived in the training grounds, a dagger was strapped to her thigh, along with a dark leather belt. Commander Eren and other knights were flabbergasted at Rosalie's new look. Some mocked at her for looking like a mercenary, with no elegance of being a noble at all. Rosalie looked towards the knights, but she didn't seem to mind their scorn. Still, their snickers reached Rosalie's ears even though her face is expressionless. Eren and Emma began to look at Rosalie with embarrassment and awkwardness. In the end, Rosalie can only command to assemble the knights into the center grounds. Eren quickly began to gather the knights, but most of them are still reluctant. Out of nowhere, a man stepped out and voiced loudly that he didn't want to obey Rosalie's words. The man criticized Rosalie that she doesn't qualify to command, because she's inexperienced. Rosalie asked the name of the cocky man, who voiced out the knight's opinion. Eren already had an headache about the ruckus, but he still introduced Toronto, a high-ranking knight. Toronto has a large build and is definitely experienced, because he's the oldest. With a spring in his step, Toronto came in front of Rosalie, not even respecting her as a duchess. Rosalie didn't care. She then ordered Toronto to bring his sword at once. Rosalie ordered as she drew the short dagger from her thigh into her hand. Eren began to panic since he didn't know that Rosalie had some combat experience and tried to warn her. Still, Rosalie didn't budge. She was a former military officer. With that, Rosalie readied her stance to prepare for the duel. However, Toronto and other knights thought that Rosalie's posture was weird. Toronto laughed loudly and brought a real sword. He is even more confident, because a sword has a longer reach than a dagger. Toronto shouted in a confident tone as he prepared for an attack. He dashed forward with his sword in an instant, under the gaze of the crowd. Rosalie quickly bent down to avoid the wide slash from Toronto. Without delay, she moved forward to take advantage of the gap. In an instant, Rosalie was already so close to Toronto as she plunged her dagger into him. Toronto tried to pull away and dodge, but Rosalie was faster. The tip of Rosalie's dagger was already producing small drops of blood on his delicate neck. Moreover, Toronto lost his balance from dodging. Right then, Rosalie criticized Toronto, declaring that she already won. She looked down on Toronto in a domineering manner. Toronto hit the cold floor with a sharp pain in his stomach, and he announced his surrender. He coughed and gasped as Rosalie's foot pressed down his neck. Rosalie warned that there's no surrender in actual battlefield. She spoke on how could a knight surrender so easily, while looking around other knights. Her foot remained on Toronto's chest, as she reminded them in a fierce tone. The stunned knights stuttered their response. It was the first time they have seen Rosalie like this. With that, Rosalie started taming the knights with a display of her military prowess. A few days later, a cheerful sound called out Rosalie while she was training the knights. A woman with a refreshing vibe waved at Rosalie, and was accompanied by a tall young man. Her name is Yoon-ah, the female protagonist of this world. Along with Derivas, the male protagonist and the crown prince. Yoon-ah called Derivas and Rosalie's name casually, indicating that they must be close. Rosalie remained indifferent as she took a seat on the couch across them. As Rosalie took a moment to study their faces, she realized that their description wasn't exaggerated. Yoon-ah has a portrayal of a fair maiden, with vivid green eyes filled with delight, with her light brown hair and emerald eyes. Yoon-ah is a dainty beauty who is absolutely stunning. However, Derivas seems to have a colder impression than Rosalie imagined. Derivas is stunningly handsome, but his sharp gaze created an atmosphere that's hard to approach. Yoon-ah fell silent after Rosalie's short reply. Her friend seems unfamiliar today. However, without Sonia's lively aura and leading the conversation, the atmosphere remained stale. Sonia broke the ice. Usually, Rosalie always complained to Sonia, but not today. Feeling the awkward air, Rosalie once again gave short and formal replies. Still, Sonia wasn't the type to be dispirited, so she invited Rosalie to hang out. Rosalie declined. It wasn't that she hates Sonia, but the real Rosalie isn't here anymore, so there's no reason to be friendly. Sonia was Rosalie's close friend, but the Rosalie now is still unfamiliar with getting close. Right after Sonia left, Rosalie looked to the side. That's because Derivas didn't go with Sonia and stayed behind instead. However, Rosalie has no reason to start the conversation. She only stared at Derivas, indicating him to leave. Out of nowhere, Derivas mysteriously smiled. He noticed and told Rosalie that she wasn't being afraid around him anymore. Rosalie looked at him warily. Although they met a few times through Sonia, they were not really close. But this time, Rosalie didn't bat an eye towards the crown prince's presence. In the novel, the cowardly Rosalie disliked the cold Derivas, and Derivas didn't like her much either. Derivas Vlodic, the Empire's crown prince and a talented swordmaster. Countless knights follow and worship him, unlike Rosalie, who was mocked by people. With their completely different nature, they wouldn't even have a conversation if Sonia wasn't there. The crown prince was also interested with Sonia, but Rosalie is only a side character in this world. Now, the crown prince's tone was filled with interest, but Rosalie wouldn't want to get involved with him. It might be because of Rosalie's sudden change in behavior, but she isn't doing this for attention. She then stood up and prepared to leave the lunatic crown prince. Rosalie finished her farewell calmly and left the reception room. As Rosalie began to walk towards the training grounds, Derivas started following her. Rosalie stopped walking and reminded Derivas that this was not the way to the garden. However, the crown prince shook his head and wanted to go to the training grounds instead. Rosalie glanced up and down at Derivas, who was smirking. In the novel, Derivas was described as a genius swordmaster. Commander Aaron followed the crown prince because Aaron was disappointed with Rosalie. Even if Rosalie has military experience, it's nothing against a swordmaster, but she didn't want to lose Aaron. That's why Rosalie prohibited the crown prince from going there with a reasonable excuse. Although Derivas came to the duchy reluctantly upon Sonia's request, he didn't regret it. He, who always looked for something interesting, piqued his curiosity with Rosalie's change in demeanor. That's why the crown prince took a step back just for today. Still, he reminded Rosalie that he isn't someone who follows anyone just because they said so. At that moment, Derivas went too close to Rosalie, catching her off guard. However, Rosalie wasn't happy at all and got really annoyed instead. Afterwards, Derivas smiled like he found a new interesting toy and left the training ground. He was called crazy and lunatic for always seeing people as playthings after all. Hours later, the knights were on their intense training while Rosalie was commanding them. During her military days, she had many experiences training large number of people much more intensively. The knights of Judah were nothing compared to soldiers, so Rosalie can't slack disciplining them. Even Toronto, who was the toughest, was on the verge of collapse. He can't help but curse Rosalie under his breath because of the hellish training. Not long after the training began, the knights started to refer Rosalie as the Devil Duchess. Rosalie didn't mind it, after all. Improving the knight's strength will help the duchy. Nevertheless, if Toronto took the duel with her seriously, Rosalie might have lost. Also, it was strange that the crown prince has taken interest into her. Maybe it's because she always avoided contact and kept her head down in the past. Her posture was bad, never ate well and exercised, but now Rosalie looked confident and beautiful. The next day, Rosalie can be seen working out early in the morning. A familiar voice called her out, so she turned back. Following her military habits, Rosalie cautiously approached the figure with a wary posture. Derivas, who had seen Rosalie being overly cautious, casually replied. Rosalie didn't know if the crown prince is being intentional or not in approaching her, but she tried to act casually. Rosalie nonchalantly replied to Derivas, subtly saying she didn't really care. Derivas didn't seem to mind since his clothes looked comfortable, as if to prove that he was really here for exercise. He then sat down and began his aura training. Rosalie turned back. She felt the air around her changing with every breath Derivas took. Aura is the power that the sword masters use, and it needs constant practice. Rosalie remembered that Derivas has been meditating every morning, but it was the first time seeing it up close. Due to her curiosity, Rosalie can't help but approach the crown prince. Right away, she asked Derivas if he could show her how to use aura. Derivas gestured and started explaining the concept of aura to Rosalie. When he raised his right hand, a blue streak manifested, making Rosalie want to touch it. The blue flame was similar to Derivas' eye color and can't be felt. When touched, Rosalie's fingertips gently touched the blue flames. She expected it to be hot, but as Derivas said, Rosalie didn't feel anything. Rosalie was fascinated to see the image that she only read in the novel. At the unexpected sight of Rosalie's childlike expression, Derivas stared at her and murmured. He spoke to himself that it was the first time seeing Rosalie like this. A low chuckle caused Rosalie to turn her head, and their faces were quite close together. In the past, Rosalie wouldn't even properly look into his face, but now it changed. At Derivas' words, Rosalie slightly averted her eyes. She might have panicked because her current actions might cause suspicion. Derivas gave a shrug and tried to change the topic by asking about Rosalie's new nickname. Apparently, the knights had been talking loudly about it throughout the duchy. Rosalie angrily decided to increase the intensity of their training. After all, looking like a devil can be helpful since they whip people rather than angels. Derivas stood up and made a striking remark, as if he had seen the devil himself. If it were any ordinary woman, she would blush or feel embarrassed at Derivas' words. However, Rosalie, who has never been in a romantic relationship before, just replied expressionlessly. Afterwards, Derivas left, feeling as if he would interfere with Rosalie's training any further. Rosalie didn't respond since she was no longer interested in aura. She wondered why would the crown prince be curious towards her. Rosalie watched him go and resumed her training. Later in the afternoon, Sonia hurriedly went to the garden. This was because she agreed to meet and hang out with Rosalie, together with the crown prince. Sonia was as bright as ever, like a flower in full bloom, making the garden even more colorful. In the center of the garden, Rosalie greeted them while Sonia opened about the upcoming tea party. The conversation was mostly led by Sonia, and Rosalie responds from time to time. Rosalie wants to join the social party, this time to secretly observe Bella and Marquis of Wendell. She needs to see if their plan for the territorial war will work the way it was originally written. Sonia changed the topic and asked Rosalie on Bella's whereabouts. Rosalie thought that the last time she saw Bella was at the Duke's office. She replied truthfully towards Sonia, since there was no secret to hide to begin with. A breeze blew in, and Rosalie's eyes caught a familiar figure from afar. Rosalie looked to where the wind was blowing, and as expected, Bella was there. Having finally made it to their table, Bella bent down to greet Derivas, the crown prince. Her crimson dress accentuated because of her auburn hair, making a strong presence. However, beneath those elegance, There's a hint of deceitfulness in her eyes. Sonia was displeased while Rosalie and Derivas made a solemn expression. Bella struck up a remark indicating that Rosalie should report things to her. Sonia frowned at Bella's irritated tone and tried to say something. However, a cold voice came from Rosalie's mouth hinting about her disagreement towards the idea. It meant that she doesn't see the need to report, since she also has authority. Flinching at Rosalie's icy voice, Bella puffed out her chest and shouted back nervously. Rosalie stood up and justified that she is the current Duchess. So Bella is in a position to follow her choices as the head of the household. Bella was the former Duchess, but she thought that she could still manipulate Rosalie. Well, Rosalie was used to be dragged around and used as a puppet, but not anymore. Right away, Rosalie ordered Dolan to escort Bella out. At Rosalie's call, Dolan stood Bella's way and spoke up. His tone is not at all polite. Bella's face flushed with anger. In the end, unable to control her boiling anger, Bella lashed out and raised her hand, intending to slap Dolan's face. Will Bella blow things out of proportion in front of the Crown Prince and Sonia, the heroine?
That's all, folks. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment down below, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be posting more videos about good reads you may like, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. See you soon.